Yeah, so because what I did, I phoned everyone up, and I didn't say, look, is it all right if I can use? What I did, I phoned up, I went, I'm doing this. All right, and everyone went, yeah. So and that's what I did. Um, that was really horrible
Yeah.
because I was, I was nervous enough anyway. I always do. I get really sort of terrified. Am I doing the right thing? Am I upsetting someone? No, 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 all this sort of rubbish. And I phoned him up, I went, oh, Pen, I'm doing this thing, and he went, no, no, no. He didn't tell me, but he did an interview with, I think it was The Guardian or something like that, and it came out in print, and the first I saw of it was him, and I think a journalist who'd interviewed him and also interviewed me. And he put in this, Pen was really scathing, he went, yes, apparently Steve might, is doing this thing, and there's probably plane loads of Japanese coming over, and what are they going? That's not very. They're not going to get the crest. And I was like, oh, fucking hell. And then he phoned me up one day and he went, Steve, I'm really sorry, but I don't want to use my material. And I was like, why not? And he went, I just don't like the idea of it being used in a commercial venue. And that's when I said to him, look, I've come to see you perform loads of times at the Vortex Jazz Club in Stoke Newington when it was in Church Street. And I said it cost me a tenner to get in, and a beer was like £4 a bottle for a little bottle of Budweiser, and if you wanted a meal, that was, really expensive. And a bottle of wine that you can buy in Tesco's for like £2 was like 11 quid and stuff. And you don't even know what you're going to get to see unless you're all read up on your avant-garde jazz stuff. I said, so, people are paying 17 quid or something to see 5 bands a day. They get a concession if they're doing it 2 days. The prices on the bar aren't that much more expensive than being in the pub. Decent toilets, a bloody good sound, and it's a really nice old Victorian music hall. And it's got to be paid. Which one is the more commercial sort of thing? And then there was this sort of grumping going on, and I was like, ugh. Anyway, I put the phone down. I thought, and I phoned up Chris G, the promoter bloke, and I went, Chris, you better sit down. The gig's off. And he went, oh God, what now? And I said, well, Penn don't want me to use the material. And I said, it's about half of it. It's a really big, from feeding. And he went, anyway, I thought, oh, sod it, I'll just do it. What can he do? Take me to court? Funny, how ironic is that? I thought, yeah, well, if he does take me to court, that'll just be really good publicity for me, so I'll do it. Anyway, he phoned up about a week before the gigs, and he went, no, sorry, Steve, I was being a twat, and of course you have my blessing, have a good one, and all this stuff. We just moved to Norfolk, and so we were settling into a new house and all that sort of stuff, so no, I wasn't in touch with them anyway, and I saw that feeding thing as my thing. It was separate, and I made it really clear to everybody that I did, in the nicest possible way. I didn't want like G to get involved because she would take over the artworky thing, the look of it, and then it would not be my thing. It would be hers. And the same with Penn. It's another reason why I can't ask them to do these things, because it becomes not my version, it becomes our version, and this has got to be my version. Not being horrible or nothing. But no, I wasn't in touch with them at all, and I just thought, I knew there would be a sort of rumble of dissent and all this sort of thing, and I thought, no, I've just got to go for it and do it, I mean, my original idea for it, anyway, was that this bloke phoned me up and he went, look, there's going to be a punk festival in the Brixton Academy, and, you can have a half-hour slot. And I was like, oh, I'll think about it. I literally just moved, And I goes, well, and I wasn't interested, to tell the truth, right? And I goes, who's playing? He goes, oh, well, The Damned, Conflict, Stiff Little Fingers, and and all the others, rattled, the Buzzcocks, and rattled them all off, and I was like, right, okay. I said, well, I'll think about it, meaning I'd forget about it instantly and just go for a drink down the pub, And then some friends came around, they said, are you going to do it? And I was like, no, and they sort of got a bit annoyed and said, why not? And I said, well, the only way I would do it is if I do something that's sort of different from me, rather than just go and do Others Who Live in a Band from the Roxy and do people's old favourites. And it suddenly come to me, no, I'll do Feeding the 5,000 from start to finish. I won't announce it, I'll just do it in the middle of everyone else's set, blow everyone else off stage. Brilliant, right? So I said this to the bloke, Chris G, and the phone went dead, and he went, I'll call you back. He called me back 40 minutes later. He went, right, the Brixton Academy thing is off. You're doing 2 nights headlining at Shepherd's Bush Empire. Everyone's really into it. Da, 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 da. And I was like, literally, that's what the phone call. And I went, oh, all right then. put the phone down, and then Flux reformed. I mean, I was really moved by that, because Colin Latu's a bit like me. Once he says something, he you know, we stick to it. And he swore that he would never reform Flux again. But because of that gig, he reformed Flux, and I was, when I saw him, I gave him the biggest hug ever. That really meant a lot to me, that he sort of did that. I always had a lot of time for old Kolsky. He's been treated badly and all, poor little sod. I don't know, maybe it's that funny thing that happens, you know, because we was Crass, we didn't even know that we were having the effect that we had. We were just in this band doing it, you know, and half the time we didn't even realise, you know, we were just, I mean, we certainly weren't making money from it. It used to go to the bloody wall, you know. It's like, how comes up really headlining band and the support band have got more than us, because we're giving all ours away to the benefit and all this stuff. And then I was accused of being a money-grabbing bastard by certain people, and then, you know, I got known as, have you got 10p, Steve? Because I had so little, I had to go round asking people in my audience, got 10p, mate, so I could get a beer. I used to barter, you know, shoes and things, like, you know, just to get new shoes, t-shirts and things. Ridiculous. And I think, but we were doing that, and I think what happened was that, because you get people who get inspired by it or get influenced by it, you get the second wave, and it's even more sort of, fascistic is a pretty strong word, but it's even more sort of hardcore than what you're doing, and it sort of built up in layers, to the extent that, you know, and I always thought, well, at the time I was like, well, it's pretty cool, you know, people are doing this DIY thing and we're giving the establishment a run for its money, it all makes sense and all this, it's a bit bit grubby around the edges, but no, we're having a go, you know, go for it. But when I was in Schwarzenegger, you know, a few years later, you know, and it's like, okay, it's got to be bloody hell, over 10 years after the event, after the crash thing, you know, and we were on this DIY circuit, and it was as bad, if not worse, than in the original days. And people even still more hardline, and people, because I'd been in this band called Crass that had been sort of really political, we had to, you know, just a bloody nightmare, and just sometimes I'd be pinned against the wall, you know, these accusations thrown at me, you know, and not even asked if I wanted to sleep on a concrete floor, because I was used to being Crass, that's what I was expected, that's what you did, you know. And I just remember, you know, when we were Crass, and we had to stand up for every line of every song. We had gone through fine-tooth comb so that we could justify every inflection, every word, every meaning, so that if we were questioned about it at gigs, we would have the answer to it. Which is why we couldn't earn money, because that would have been totally wrong. The argument we had, you know, when this thing came up about, if you don't spend this money, the tax man's going to start sniffing around. So and ahhed, what should we buy with it? And I was going, motorbike, and they're going, no, pub, chip shop, no, bought a new van and gear, you know, and all this crap. Oh, great, you know. But that's how hardline it was, and I think that's gone on. But then what happened was, like, maybe some people, you know, got into this DIY thing, couldn't get out of it, and then thought, well, why should I anyway? Or if I, you know, if you get better equipment, you've sold out. And no, this is DIY. It's got to be seen. It's hard line. You've got to be living a life, you know, and all this sort of stuff. Well, if you live that life, all you're doing is chasing money. You're falling out of your mates because you're always hungry and cold. Your bones are aching because you're in a crap van, which is probably breaking down everywhere. And you're getting to a gig and you're not even being represented properly because half the PA ain't working. And people who come to see you for the first time think that's what you sound like, and it's just crap, you know. And as a punter, you find it's hard to buy my money back because it's not fair. I don't care what benefit it's for, but you know, there's no reason it can't be done sort of professionally and good. And I think because I dared to step outside that, I went, no, I'm not liking having that. I'm going to do it in a commercial venue. There are going to be security there. You are going to have to pay these prices. The bogs are going to, you can't smoke inside, sorry, that's the law. Well, yeah, sorry, because I want to do, what do you want to do? In the middle of, yeah, probably I do actually, in a teepee in a field, you know, with someone pedaling a bike to create electricity, and, you know,